turn it over to Kuznar.
Right. Thanks, Kenny. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you all hear me fine. I'm a bit of a peripatetic, so I'm going to move back and forth. I can't stay still. And I'm very honored to be asked back again to talk here. It's a great group, and I'm glad to see so many faces on this very chilly night. So, like Kenny was saying, he said, you know, it's Darwin's Day, it's Valentine's Day, it's and everything. So, can you do something on the evolution of human sexuality? So I'll say this. It's not specifically my area of research, but I'm a physical anthropologist. I teach this out at IPFW, and I looked at it as a great opportunity to cram into one evening, maybe about 45 minutes, the class I really want to teach. And so I'm going to go through very fast and furious here. If I dare say, like a couple of teenagers whose parents have just stepped out to get groceries or something. And so I'm going to hit a lot of topics here. But there really is a message here. There's a tremendous amount of research on human sexuality and the evolution of human sexuality. But it's also very frustrating because it doesn't have a lot of depth. So we're just going to hit a lot of topics. And I can talk about some of this stuff in more depth perhaps, but it's kind of hard to because it's funny how little we know about the thing that we all seem to obsess about the most, and that quite frankly structures our lives. Let's face it, we spent the first part of our lives looking for mates, and the rest of our lives paying the consequences. Okay? It truly structures our lives. So, all right, so here's a Valentine's belated evolution of human sexuality, or how to ruin a perfectly romantic holiday. My mother-in-law said an interesting thing last time we were together. I talked about something that I was looking at, and it was an interesting topic, I think, and I said, I'm going to analyze this to death. And she goes, you know what? It's just what you're going to do, Larry. So sometimes I can suck the romance even out of romance. So first of all, why is human sexuality important? It is the key to understanding evolution. I was so pleased to come to be here in the fall and talk about not just Homo naledi, that big find that they made in South Africa, but just about evolutionary theory in general, because a lot of people have ideas about what it is that really don't match what it truly technically is all about. And at the bottom line, it's all about reproducing. That's what living things do. I'm not saying you have to go out and do it, but that is fundamental to our definition of life. So that's one reason why human sexuality is so important. It's the measure of biological success. And we are successful. My students get tired of me saying this because it's like a broken record. But if you look at us as an animal, we're pretty big. In addition to our large body size, we have tremendous nutritional needs mainly because of our huge brains. If you add that all together, ecologically speaking, there shouldn't really be that many of us on the planet to begin with, and yet there are 7 billion human beings. It's an amazing thing. We figured something out. You know what else is really amazing about it? We reproduce we don't have that many offspring. So we do the sex thing, we make the babies, and we're incredibly successful at keeping them alive. So they go on and make more babies, and that's the core of evolutionary theory. That's what it's all about. So there you go. No success without reproduction, and no reproduction without some sex. Have you ever thought, why sex? Have you ever really thought, why is there this thing called sex? So many of the species on this planet reproduce sexually, and why is that? Now, this is not, well, why not? Because it's fun. This is a real question, because there's some compelling reasons why we should not do sex. If life is about replication, why make half of yourself? That's all you do in sex. And it seems like you're shortchanging yourself. Like bacteria, they seem to have it. You just blood off another clone, and there you are. And here's the thing I think we can all relate to in this room. You got to find a mate. It takes time. And here's the other thing. It's dangerous. In the fall, when I teach my introductory physical anthropology course, when I get to this part of the course, it's a couple weeks before the deer go into rut. And I always ask the class, some of you have heard me say this, so what's going to happen a couple weeks from now? And someone says, we're going to start seeing a lot of dead deer. Yes, the roads are lined with the bodies of sex-crazed deer. Bucks are out there, gun it, and they're chasing around the does, and sex makes you stupid, and you're running in front of cars. We should never have sex. Nothing should have sex. And it's, ladies, you might meet this guy. It's a meme you see on the internet. And gentlemen, you might hook up with Glenn Close from Dangerous Liaison. I hope no one has any pet bunnies. Right? I might be dating myself in case. And also I'll date myself a little further. Those of us that are old enough to remember, looking for the whole dating thing didn't work out very well for Diane Keaton and looking for Mr. Goodbar. All right, you younger people, Google it. It's dangerous. Yeah, you don't know what you're going to meet in the mate. You'll get run over by a car. The lion will eat you because you've got to find that mate. So there's a lot of compelling reasons. Oh, and let's not forget this. When you finally find a mate, you got to deal with their crap. All right, so compelling reasons why we should never bother with sex. So why do we? I'm wondering, and based on my experience last time I was here, I think there might be at least a few people in here with a business background, maybe investment background. Would any of you care to chime in as to why sex pays off in the long run?
You diversify your gene portfolio.
Oh my God, that's exactly what I hope someone would say. Exactly. Just as with investments, in the long run, you have to diversify your portfolio, and that's why sex exists in nature. It diversifies our genetic portfolio. You've got to be in all of my classes from here on.
Give me a scholarship.
I'll work on it. So, yeah, that's exactly what it does. Yeah, you can be the most perfectly adapted individual, human being in northern Indiana, February 25th, 2016, and you're all like, high on yourself, decide, I'm just going to clone myself because I'm so perfect. But none of us can predict the future. And because the future is variable, you've got to mix up your genes with others. And that has turned out to be a really successful evolutionary strategy for many, many, many species. So that's the sex thing. We can relate to it. Even amoebas can relate to it. But here's a really human thing. Love. Why love? Well, why not? Think about this. In a biological sense, evolutionary sense, the most important decision we make, the most important investment we make, especially for the women, because you don't have that many times to do it, is who you're going to mate with. It should be very carefully considered. And here's a dilemma that we have as rational human beings who can think in a way other animals cannot. There's a lot of fish in the sea. Roughly speaking, about 2 billion options, given the 7 billion people we have in the world right now. And here's the problem. A rational person would take forever to make that decision, which means you'd never get around to mating. And that's where love comes in. Economists call it this, evolutionary biologists call it this. We call it a stopping rule. Love is a stopping rule. It does other things to help us make decisions, but a very important thing is the emotions of love, just like emotions are involved when we buy a car, right? You're looking at all your options, but you still got to make a decision. But that one's red, okay? So you do your best, and at the end of the day, you've got to make an emotional decision, and love does that for us. So what I'd like to switch to now is mating systems in nature. right? There's often a lot of structure for different species in terms of how they mate. Sexual dimorphism, which is the differences in between the sexes, usually physical differences. We also look at behavioral differences. And we actually measure this mathematically as a ratio. The average male measurement, usually it's body weight. It's very simple. Everything has it, and it correlates with some very interesting things. Over the average female weight. And this is an ecological relationship that was discovered decades ago with birds. Then we looked at different kinds of mammals. And even our close cousins in our primate world follow this rule to a T. And here's the rule. If the ratio is 1, that means males and females are alike in body size. And that correlates with pair bonding monogamy. If you've got a sexual dimorphism ratio that's over 1, and it's usually substantially over 1, that correlates with polygyny. And polygyny is a mating system where a small group of males mate with all the females. Okay? In other words, that small group of males are able to exclude the other males, usually through physical intimidation. Okay? And, so it pays to be bigger. Harem is actually a technical term for mating systems. It's just extreme polygyny. It's a system where only one male mates with all the females in the group. And as you can imagine, that's where we see the highest ratio. Males tend to be twice as large as females. So, what do we have in the primate world? Gibbons. How many of you have seen the gibbons at the zoo? It's one of the great things about the Fort Wayne Zoo. We've got 2 species of gibbons and the siamang. That's most of the species of the lesser apes in the world right here in Fort Wayne. I think it's cool. All right. But if you come back and tell me, I saw what that male and female were doing, I know you've been closer than they should allow you to be to those animals in the zoo because you can't tell them apart. They're the same body size. Baboons are a good example of polygynous species. Males are usually 50% up to almost twice as large as females. And then gorillas, of course, take the cake. Males are twice the size as females, and that's a harem species. I do this in all my physical anthropology classes. Now, what would an inquiring mind want to know? That's right. Where do humans fit? And this is where it gets interesting. We are so like our primate cousins and so unlike them at the same time. The global average for humans is 20%, which is weird. Because here's the thing. In nature, whether you're looking at geese or gibbons, if you have true pair bonding monogamy, it's 1. It's nothing else. It's just 1.0. If you've got polygyny, it's usually some substantial thing. We're in between. What are we, confused? And by the way, in terms of ruining like all the romance and joy in life, I took that picture of that couple on a beach in Costa Rica. And, most people would look up and say, hey, there's a pretty good-looking guy, a pretty sexy girl. All I saw was great example of human sexual dimorphism. So what's going on with human mating? First of all, polygyny. Now, to be clear on this, polygyny is marriage between one man and more than one woman. Haven't you ever noticed that when people define marriage, they seem angry? I don't know why that is. But. All right, so that's what polygyny is. So what's going on with that? 75% of the different cultures that we've studied, this is in a statistical sample, actually have norm as the main norm, as the main family value, if you will, polygyny. That's what everyone should be striving for in those societies. So as a norm, as an expectation, it has been very common in human history and continues to be today. You see that map there of different nations with laws that permit and polygyny and whatnot. You can see that and where it exists. So you can see it still exists in a lot of places in the world. There you go. You've got the president of Jacob Zuma from South Africa. President of South Africa has 4 wives, has had 6 in his lifetime. and paid 10 cattle for I think she was a Swazi princess, but they never got past the engagement. So, but there you go. That's from Sister Wives. I guess I don't even know what channel does it, but it's like I'm sorry. TLC. Okay.
I mean, I heard.
I've had friends tell me about all the things too. You know. Now, actually, sororal polygyny is the most common form of polygyny that we've encountered as anthropologists. That's where a group of sisters married a particular guy. Now, sister wives, actually, I don't think they're actually sisters in that thing, in that reality thing. But so sororal polygyny. Now, there's some issues with polygyny, though, that we've also recognized studying polygynous families. It's hard to get the co-wives to get along. That's why we usually see sororal polygyny, because sisters are more likely, because of their relatedness, to be willing to support one another. Here's an interesting thing. Women will have more babies in a monogamous marriage than in a polygynous one, because despite what you guys are thinking about yourselves, there's only so much of you to go around. Okay, so if you're dividing yourself up among a number of women there, they're going to have a lower probability of getting pregnant. So why does polygyny exist at all? A colleague of mine, Elizabeth Kashtan, did a brilliant study. She looked at all the different factors that we thought correlated with polygyny, plus others we didn't. And she found that the key factor was selection for disease-resistant males. That predicted polygyny more than anything else. And the bottom line was this. Maybe you'll have fewer offspring, but boy, if you've got a male with good disease-resistant genes, you know, more of your offspring are actually going to survive to adulthood. So in societies with a lot of what we call a heavy disease load, you see more polygyny. That is absolutely brilliant study. So polygyny exists. That's one way that we can go about reproducing. Now, polyandry, to be clear, is the proper marriage between one woman and more than one man. Okay? All right. It's primarily found in several societies in Tibet. Okay? And we know why it goes on there. They tell us themselves, when you're living at 15,000 feet and you either grow barley or raise yaks, guess what? All the land you will ever have to grow barley and raise yaks, you got. There's no more. So if you wind up producing a large family and try to divide that inheritance among your offspring, they'll all die. So what's the solution? Select one daughter, marry her to a group of brothers, and she's the reproductive bottleneck, right? So that you can sustain a family. It's good for monasteries, right? Up to the Chinese invasion of 1959, 1/3 of all Tibetans were either monks or nuns, because there's a lot of unmarried women, of course, because of the polyandry. And let's face it, if you're the third brother, what's the point? Right? Almost always fraternal. Although not always. This woman here made the BBC just a year or two ago. She's from Kenya. They're all from Kenya. And she couldn't choose. So she said to the guys, hey, guess what? It's either both of you or none of you. And so, that can happen too. Although that tends to be very rare. And this little cartoon I found might explain why, ladies. I know, men, you're not always a walk in the park. So. We're not that bad, though, are we, guys? We're not that bad. So. And then there's monogamy. And this is really interesting, too. I won't do the angry definition because it's all, as Hoosiers, we know that one, right? I mentioned earlier about in nature how this tends to play out. Non-human animals take monogamy very seriously. So geese that populate IPFWs and Ivy Tech's campus, right? They're all over the place, crapping on the lawn. And I defy you to tell me the boy from the female geese, right? And so a great example of that, bald eagles. Like, they've got bird brain, so we know they don't love. We're not going to go there. But a male and female eagle will pair bond, and then they'll fly off hundreds of miles away from one another. And once a year, when they come together to breed, they'll find one another over hundreds of miles, and they meet in the sky, and they clasp their talons and do a death spiral. As they hit the ground, they burst up and go back up. You know, that's love, folks. Now, 25% of the cultures that we've studied in anthropology have as their normative preference monogamy. So that's a minority, but it's what we call a strong minority, yes.
Is the U.S. one of them?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And although clearly not everyone, sister wives, goes with that norm, but once again, it's a norm. It's like this is what you ought to do. Here's what people do, which is really interesting. Most marriages, despite the norms of your society, whether it's polygynous or polyandrous, most people wind up monogamously married. You know, so monogamy is a thing about us. It's not the only thing about us. Clearly, we figure out different ways of pairing up and mating in different environments and whatnot. But we have this raging debate in anthropology. Are we a monogamous species or not? I think it totally misses the point. We're a flexible species, but clearly, more often than not, monogamy seems to work for us. But it ain't the same as eagles and geese. It's serial monogamy in gibbons. And the comedian Tracy Ullman, she says, I think serial monogamy says it all. The typical pattern for a human plucked randomly off the face of the planet is to have a mate at one time, but then to have a series of mates throughout one's lifetime. And so, why do we wind up having a series of mates? So here's falling in and out of love with you, which my opinion comes from probably the greatest song ever written by Pure Prairie Lake. Amy, you may know it. We got an itch, folks. Might remember, well, some of you will remember this movie. But in all deference to Billy Wilder and Marilyn Monroe, it ain't a 7-year itch. It's shorter than that. It's a 4-year itch. It's every 4. Give and take. Now, who do we have to thank for the 4-year itch? This woman here, the anthropologist Helen Fisher, who is famous for her. If you watch Discovery Channel, practically any documentary on human sexuality, they work her in here someplace. She does really great research. Number of books, Anatomy of Love. Why him? Why her? Why love? They're really good books. I highly recommend them. And so what has she found out through her research? She's found out that love is a cocktail of brain chemicals: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. There's a couple others that we're going to mention as well. So, going around the room, just yell out, when you're in love, how do you feel? Okay. Euphoric? Okay. Wow, no one else has been in love? Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. Did you say compassion? Yes. We're hitting the hormones. So here we go. We're not to compassion yet. But we're going to get to the anxiety really fast. Okay. Norepinephrine, and there's other things involved, but norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin are kind of a triumvirate, especially in that initial falling in love phase. So norepinephrine, this is a drug that it's a hormone, and that's important because hormones are proteins. Where do proteins come from? Our body manufactures them by reading the genes in our DNA. And that's what we inherited. So here's your evolutionary link. And so norepinephrine is produced so that it's involved with attention. So that thing like where everything they do, you just notice, and you're totally focused on it and all that kind of stuff. That's norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is also involved with what we call the limbic reward system. this is a very primitive part of the brain. This is the thing that says, ooh, I like that. I need more of it. Okay? So, if you've been in love, that addictive feel that you have for that person, there's a lot of norepinephrine being produced by the body. And by the way, people tattoo the chemical formula for these on their bodies, which I love. I wish I had done it. So maybe I should. So which brings us then to dopamine, alertness and energy. So who said euphoria? Oh, Vicky, yeah, that. Oh, they're here now, and you're just like so excited and everything. That's dopamine. It's a feel-good drug. So it's giving you that energy and that high. And then this here is serotonin. When you can do nothing but think about that person, that's serotonin talking, and it's associated with obsessions and compulsions. Now, here's the issue with regard to the nervous as hell and things like that. When these things are in balance, it's great. And come on, when you're in love, when they get out of balance or something doesn't happen that meets an expectation, you go from great and wonderful to the pits. Ergo, mood, anxiety. So a lot of the turmoil that we experience, we know is associated with these brain chemicals that are flooding our gray matter as we're feeling love. Now, love is one thing. Let's face it, you gotta have some lust in there too, right? You have to have the attraction. Testosterone and estrogen. Both males and females produce it. Males do a lot more of the testosterone, less of the estrogen, and vice versa for females. But these are basically your lust drugs. Okay, so that kind of feeling. Okay, I think we all know that. But then, Mr. Compassion over here. Okay, oxytocin and vasopressin. Oxytocin is often called the love drug, and I don't like to label it that way because love is quite obviously complicated. You already talked about a number of different things involved that we can relate to different chemical things going on in the brain that in turn relate to what we inherited in our genes. Oxytocin, I prefer to call the cuddle drug. So, and this is not only associated with love and stuff like that. When you're in a group and everyone's gelling, and you're all feeling good, you feel like you belong, your body produces a lot of oxytocin. Of course, that also happens when you're with another person and things are going well and everything like that. So, for instance, after orgasms, the brain is flooded with oxytocin. Men produce oxytocin. Men produce a lot of another hormone as well, vasopressin. Vasopressin, there's an interesting study where they had men masturbate, and they had men have, intercourse with a woman. And after intercourse with a woman, there was 4 times more vasopressin produced than when they masturbated. There's something about that connection with another, like, actual living, breathing human that seems to matter. And vasopressin has another effect. So ladies, like after sex and everything like that, and he rolls over and passes out, he's not being rude. Vasopressin, it has that effect on the guy. So cut the guy a little slack. He still loves you. It's just resting time. Okay, so a lot of stuff going on there. So I'm trying to channel an old PSA commercial here. Some of you may remember it. So if there's anyone out there who still isn't clear, this is your brain. And this is your brain, not on drugs, on love, yeah. Your brain is fried when you're in love. You are messed up. You truly are messed up. And you cannot go through life, sustain this through life, and really function. So it's a bit of a problem. But don't worry. It won't last. That's the bright side of it. Love will wane. Our bodies go through a process, and this is the 4 years. Helen Fisher did this cross-cultural study of how long marriages typically last if they are going to end in a divorce, and it was not the 7 year, it actually was 4. And it corresponds with systematic changes in our body chemistry, our brain chemistry. And after a while, your body just kind of says, knock this crap off, and you fall out of love. Ergo, that great song by Pure Prairie League. Amy. Okay, so there's a lot we can talk about with regard to the science of attraction, and we're not going to be able to talk about it all here, but just to pheromones. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about pheromones. Yeah, we are very much impacted by scents. The problem that humans have, we can't smell you at a very far distance. But if we get up close and personal, those things are very important. Body dimensions, we're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. Body symmetry, I'll talk about that. And there's like books for all these things, a ton of books. There's sperm wars. Why hasn't anyone made a video game of that, I wonder? It probably is. And you just can't do that. There's so many things. So I'm just going to try to touch upon a few things here. Let's start with what turns men on. Symmetry is important. We're born. We are genetically programmed. All organisms are. I shouldn't say all, but virtually all, to grow symmetrically. But none of us are perfectly symmetrical because our bodies receive shocks throughout our lifetime. It can be differences in nutrition, it can be disease, things like that, and that cause us to be asymmetrical. Body symmetry is a key component of what makes individuals attractive, not just humans to humans. We see this in all sorts of different species. And it's basically an indicator that you can withstand the rigors of life. Now, for women, high brows, smooth skin, all those youthful features are saying, okay, if she's had babies, she hasn't had many yet, so that means she can have a lot more into the future. Okay, the term for that in anthropology is called reproductive value, and so that's what these are. And let's face it, there's a multi-billion-dollar cosmetic industry based upon that, right? So, youth. We're talking about youth. I love this study. Oh my goodness, this cracks me up. Did a study, asked men of different ages, what's your preferred age of a mate? And so here you've got same age, 45-degree angle here. And the darker the green, the more men, the larger percentage of men said that's what they would prefer. Now, I'm sure at least a few of you are familiar with the formula for the threshold of creepiness. It's the minimum age at which you should date, and that is half your age minus 7. Look at what the guys like to push maybe a little bit over the threshold of creepiness, and it goes up systematically with the man's age. So we've got Larry King, we've got thank you, yes, Hugh Hefner. But you know what? These guys are outdone by another. There is an individual who, inspired by Donald Trump, decided he's a billionaire in Australia, that he is going to be Australia's next president. He's now running for president. And he's 86, and there's his 26-year-old wife, who is running with him and promising to be the fresh, young face of Australia. So there you go. And I think he's pushing his threshold of creepiness over about 30 years, if I did my math. So there you go. So, and guys like curves. That's probably not news, is it? Okay. How many of you are familiar with the 0.7 hip to waist ratio? Yeah. So if yes, and actually this diagram is the only one I could get, but it's actually inaccurate. The hips are actually like incorporating the booty part there, right? The hips, okay, compared to the smallest point on the waist. And if you divide the waist by the hips and get a ratio of 0.7, and society from culture after culture where we tested this, it comes out 0.7. It's amazing. And once again, it's a measure of reproductive value, okay? The waist is narrower to the hips. That indicates that, younger and greater potential to have more babies. So that is the figure that in society after society men prefer. Oh, wrong way. And it's independent of body size. So, a woman who's large still has the curves, the right proportions, she's attractive. So you got famous, Marilyn Monroe. Is that Gina Lollobrigida? I think.
Sophia Loren.
Oh, thank you, Sophia Loren. And the Venus de Milo, a lot of classic sculptures have these ideal portions. And I'm too old to know who the thin woman is there, but she's some famous model, real thin, but has the proper proportions. So, does anyone know who that is? Oh, well, it doesn't matter. And more curves. There can't be enough curves. Okay? The booty thing. It's not just that there's fat deposits on the butt, but it's associated with something called lumbar curvature. Obstetricians discovered that the ideal curvature of a woman's lumbar vertebrae for giving childbirth is 45.5 degrees. Too straight, and it interferes with childbirth. Too acute, and that interferes with it as well. It's actually a pathological condition. There's it's like porridge, like Goldilocks' porridge, right? There's a perfect in between, and that's associated with the whole booty thing. And so there's even panties called booty pop panties. I love this phrase. They're the panties that make your booty pop. So, all right. There are two sexes, right? So, what's turning women on? Well, guess what? Symmetry. Very important, right? Goes back to those disease-resistant genes. The guy on the right. And there's something else going on with the guy on the right, but I've got a better graphic that I'm going to click on now. So, yeah, good facial symmetry is important. A feminized masculine face. Now that sounds like an oxymoron. Basically, a feminized masculine face is a face that is undeniably masculine, square jaw, fairly prominent brow, prominent cheekbones and things like that, but larger than average lips for a male and slightly higher than average brows for a male. This is the male face that says, I'm all man, but I'm not going to murder you. I can have a male moment here with my male counterparts. I think next time you're on a date, that should be your first line. I think it's going to work. There's only one study that found this, and it was in England, so this might not be biological. This could be cultural, but English women like men with the Sean Connery, hairy thing going on there. So, and in Austin Powers, they made a parody of that. So at least in England, that's going to do it for you. I don't know about elsewhere. Okay, and guess what, guys? You don't get off on not having proportions too. Women are checking you out. For men, it's a 0.9 hip to waist ratio. Okay, so yeah, they like this. And here's the other thing: the golden ratio. This comes up so often in nature; it's a little freaky. The golden ratio is if the whole length A plus B is to A as A is to B. That's the golden ratio. That's the ratio is 1.618. Okay. This comes up in all kinds of things in nature. It comes up in math, things like Fibonacci sequences and stuff like that. It's one of those freaky things about the cosmos that shows there's some underlying structure going on there. And lo and behold, and that's good old Pythagoras. Suppose it was the first person to discover that. We love our old Greek guys. And then you got these guys, which, quite frankly, I think that's all Photoshop. But here you go. Yeah, take the smallest point of the waist and the broadest point of the shoulders, and the guys that are considered, the best looking to women have that golden ratio. You'll go much beyond that, and you're blowing it. So, interesting, if you Google golden ratio, you're going to first get a whole bunch of protein supplement and steroid websites with guys that are like, way out to here, and everything, saying this is what you have to have. And they measure it in the wrong way on purpose to convince guys that these guys here, and you don't have to look at these modern pictures. It's always been that way. The statue of David, Michelangelo's statue of David, and I confess I don't know who those old dead guys are, but they've got it too. Just gets repeated over and over. So yeah. And then just as with those female silhouettes that have been used in experiments, we do the same thing with males. And sure enough, these are the ones that women prefer. And for women, age is not so important. This is a different picture, isn't it? Okay. Now, another anthropologist, David Buss, interviewed, I think it was 17,000 people in I forget how many different cultures around the world as to your preference of age of your mate. And this particular study mirrors his global results very well. On average, women prefer a male, on average, 4 years older than them. All right? But there's a big range here. But there's another interesting thing that goes on. The person that put this up on the web called this the cliffs of immaturity. So yeah, if you're 18 to 22-year-old guy thinking that every mature woman out there is just dying to have you, not entirely right. Might be right on occasion. That's kind of an interesting thing, and it starkly contrasts with the guy's preferences. So there are so many reasons why there are battles of the sexes, and this has got to be one of them. I told you I was going to ruin romance for you. And let's not forget these guys, the bad boys. Women kind of like that too. Although I have to qualify it. It's something that in anthropology we call the novel male syndrome, and we didn't discover it with humans, although we now recognize that humans have this tendency. We discovered it in the rhesus macaque and then in other baboon species. And these are polygynous species, and females have really two preferences for the main males that they mate with. One is dominant males that have excluded the other males. And the other males are ones they never saw before. And it's really an interesting phenomenon. And so as proud Hoosiers, I want to hear you resoundingly and unanimously shout out who was the original bad boy and arguably probably the baddest of them all. There you go. I knew someone would get it. Fairmont, Indiana. Please go see the James Dean Museum. Okay? There he is. I've been in Indiana for 25 years. I kind of feel like a Hoosier, so I'd like to have those moments of Hoosier pride. All right. Now we come to the triumph of evolution. The thing that it's masterful in the way it's just, well, let me just get to it. The human penis. The human penis is an amazing thing. It probably shouldn't even exist, but it does. What we have here, the purple things are erect length, but the tan ones are overall volume, okay, of the penis. Gorillas, an adult male gorilla is 400 pounds. His erect penis is about 1.25 inches. And the overall volume is virtually not there. So I think I've got oh yeah, there we go. Okay. You probably can't read that, but the little caption on that says she's definitely thinking it. Chimpanzees, they're doing better. But notice how very thin. And there's another thing I want you to notice. Notice how the penis comes to a point that's very common in nature. Okay, it just comes to a little tiny point there. And also very thin. So the overall volume is quite small. And then are you ready for this? I want like Thus Spake Zarathustra playing in the background. There we go. Of course, this is a famous geoglyph from England carved into the chalk of the countryside here and everything, but showing that thing about which at least male humans seem to be so proud. It's interesting that it's so volumetrically huge. The length, average, the best study we have is about 5.16 inches long and 4.59 inches around. And so that's where you get not just the length, but also the volume and everything. Which begs the question, why is there such a big thing? No other animals have, no other primates especially have this. Now, nature, I don't mean to personify nature. Nature's just, it's there. But if nature had a personality, nature would have a cruel, cruel, cruel sense of humor. It's called the baculum. Do anyone know what a baculum is? Okay, yes. Other mammals have bacula. It's a penis bone. Okay? Right? In order to successfully inseminate a female, the penis has got to go in the vagina. I think you knew that. And having a bone in there helps. Okay? And so animals have this. So do primates. Here, for instance, is a rhesus macaque. And see his erection there. It's got a bone in there helping him out. And so, I love this graphic. Orangutans and gorillas have a baculum that's about the size of their penis. A lot of support there. Okay? Chimpanzees and their close relatives, the bonobo or pygmy chimp, they have a baculum that's about half the size of their penis. Still, there's some buttressing there, some help. Where's our baculum, humans? There's none. It's amazing. Humans have none. And right now I want Pfizer and the other ED drug companies to resoundingly say, thank you, nature. There'd be no ED if humans had a baculum. We're still puzzling over this one in anthropology, quite frankly. The best theory we have is something we call honest signaling. And basically, if we found that in non-human primate species, males who are dominant have an easier time having erections and inseminating females. And so this might be an honest signal. So if a female's wondering, is this guy really worthwhile? Well, hey, if he can get an erection, keep it there, get the job done, he's a better bet and leave the others behind. Now, yes.
I had a quick question about the baculum.
Please.
So, it doesn't exist only in groups that don't have a fighting structure. I forgot the right word I was going to say. The baculum does exist. Those that have like the I can't think of our word now. Like the fighting hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a correlation?
No, because even like I'm pretty sure that even what we're trying to say here, gibbons have a baculum, and now there's something complicated going on. And what I teach in my classes is I want my students to understand how much a part of nature we are, how much we are animals, and how similar we are to our primate cousins. But at the same time, once you get an appreciation of that, you start seeing how we're different too. We are a unique animal in some ways, and this is another way that we're kind of unique. Yeah, penis size isn't everything. We all know that. But size is. And relative body sizes, as I mentioned before, but also testicle sizes. Chimpanzees have what we call a promiscuous mating system. What that means is when a female is in estrus, when she's in heat, she pretty much mates with all males in the group. Now, it turns out she doesn't mate with them all equally, and that's an important complication. But she'll literally lay over a log, and the males will line up and kind of wait their turn and everything like that. So how are the males competing? Male chimpanzees have ginormous testicles. It's sperm wars, okay? That's a great book, by the way. It really is a very good book, Sperm Wars. And so they've got huge testicles, bonobos, chimpanzees. And then gorillas, orangutans, if you're the only game in town, you don't need huge testicles because, you'll have sex and eventually you'll get, you'll impregnate females because there's no other competitors. Where do humans fit? And we don't. Just like our relative body sizes, male human testicles, that's repetitive. Human testicles are intermediate. indicating that there must be some degree of promiscuous mating in our evolutionary past, maybe even our current present, but not like what we see in chimpanzees. We're doing some stuff that's kind of different. All right, so those are some other important considerations. For instance, here's gibbons, monogamous, tiny penis, tiny testicles. Move on over here to humans, bigger size difference, ginormous penis, and medium-sized testicles. So there you go. Now, the deep mystery, right? The thing we all ponder over. There it is. Okay. I'm going to plug something now. If you haven't gone to see the Fort Wayne Civic Theater's Young Frankenstein, it's playing through this weekend. It's the last weekend. We saw it a couple weekends ago. Obviously, artist subjective, but I thought it was great. And you will hear the Madeline Kahn character saying, "Deep mystery of life, I finally found you." Y'all know the film? Okay, good. So what's up with that female orgasm? Well, of course, there's got to be a controversy. So let's look at one theory. One theory is that it is a vestigial response. It has no function. It's basically a mistake of nature. Like nipples on a man. Or our favorite example in biology in general, there are a number of lizard species that have non-functioning legs, right? And so they're vestigial organs. For humans, our main one is the appendix, right? It's a digestive organ we don't use, but we still kind of have it hanging around, okay? So those are examples of vestigial. Well, why would anyone say that? It's kind of curious to me. The feminist historian of science, Elizabeth Lloyd, is the one who's promoted this theory the most. Is that, there is no function to the female orgasm. It's just really a mistake. Or a holdover. Because males have to have orgasms to eject sperm into females. She points out less than 20% of women by surveys reliably achieve orgasm through penile vaginal intercourse. The 34% of women who rarely or never experience orgasm have babies, as do the women who typically always orgasm. So that's her argument. And then you've got the other theory that no, orgasms exist for an evolutionary reason, that they actually enable females to reproduce more. And there's a number of different theories. I have to apologize. I had to throw in the fake orgasm scene from When Harry Met Sally. And this is actually an inappropriate place to put it because these are real orgasms we're talking about. But I didn't know where else to put it. It had to be here. Don't you agree? All right. One is that the fact that it's kind of fickle. We know this from economic studies of consumer behavior and everything like that. The best way to motivate someone to do something is not reward them all the time. You're always trying to get that thing that you want. That's one old theory. Another one is the Upsuck hypothesis. This was published in 1993. They did an interesting study where they had couples have sex, and then women would stand up, and they would take basically like a credit card kind of a thing, and capture the semen that came out of their vaginas, and then they looked at the sperm counts. And it turned out that women that had orgasms retained more of the sperm. And so the upsuck hypothesis, the rhythmic contractions of the uterus, seem to be retaining more sperm, therefore higher probability of insemination. Fluctuating asymmetry. Once again, studies of women, their orgasmic experiences, the more symmetrical their partner, the more orgasms they have. Another theory is that it's a good way of evaluating male support. So, like, if he cares enough, maybe he's worth keeping around. He can bring you some other, support. And then finally, an interesting study of women's orgasmic experiences when they're cheating. They have better sex when they're cheating on the partner. seems. So these are all, basically the theory here is that, okay, you need a stable male for what the male can help you with, but you look around for some of those good genes too, and when you find them, you go for that. So interesting kind of controversy going back and forth. And one of the linchpins of the controversy is the clitoris, which is the next and pretty much final thing that we're going to address here. Now, before we get too much into the clitoris and what we know about it today, or more appropriately, what we don't know, we've got to talk about Princess Marie Bonaparte. She is the great-grandniece of Napoleon Bonaparte. She was a famous psychiatrist in the early 20th century. Actually, I have this up here. Psychiatrist. One of the interesting, she was the one who ransomed Freud from the Nazis. She saved Freud. And but she also published an interesting article. And what she did here is she measured the distance between the clitoris and the urethra in 224 women and interviewed them about their experiences with orgasm. And it's called the rule of thumb. Women who had a distance less than an inch more regularly experienced orgasms, and one who were further apart less regularly experienced orgasms, indicating there might be some underlying physical thing going on with the clitoris and orgasm. The next study that was done on this was in 1940. There has been no study done on it ever since. Amazing. I mean, how much money is spent in sexual counseling and people writing stuff on this stuff, and we've got like 2 studies in 100 years. That's kind of shocking to me. So, there we go. That's okay. So, what do we know about the anatomy of the clitoris? I was amazed. I dug into this myself. It's like, okay, there's got to be some stuff. It's amazingly little. One of the main studies is on cadavers of deceased older women. And I forget what the number of cases was, but it was like under 10. That's not a good sample. All right. And there's another good sample. There's a better sample. Oh, here we go. Almost nothing known. How many of you know Amy Schumer's famous quote here? I'll let you read it for yourself. Okay. So, there is a decent study, and it was done only a few years ago, where they did MRIs of women's pelvises to try to get a sense, what is there to the clitoris? And going back to Elizabeth Lloyd's argument, she published an article where they measured the external part of the clitoris, the length of it, and that's it. And they showed that it was very variable. And in evolution, traits that do not have selection on them tend to be very variable because they randomly vary. But if there's selection operating on something, then you're going to see less variation because it's selecting for whatever is most adaptive. But they didn't do anything about the volume of the clitoris. And here's the thing about the clitoris, if you didn't already know, it's huge! It's ginormous! Most of it, the vast majority of the clitoris, is deep inside of the body. Until recently, it was composed of the glands, the corpus cavernosum, and the crus clitoris. But recently they discovered that the bulbs of vestibule, which you see are very large and happen to wrap around the vaginal canal, are most of it. And those are erectile tissue. And so, I don't know if you can see this here given the lighting and everything, but this is, yeah, it's kind of a 3D view and everything. There's a great article saying any 2-dimensional depiction of the clitoris, including what's inside of the body, is totally misleading. It has to be 3-dimensional. And so all the controversy you hear about vaginal orgasms, G-spots, and all that kind of stuff is ridiculous because it treats every clitoris as though it's identical. And if you've ever cut open any animal for any purpose, you will see that no 2 individuals' organs look exactly alike. And so a lot of what could be going on with, orgasms through penile vaginal sex have a whole lot to do with the variations in size and configuration of this erectile tissue, the vast majority of which is inside of the body. This was a revelation to medical science. I forget, it was 2010 or something like that. It was recent, and it was a revelation. Another revelation. I don't think I have a slide for it, but and some of you may have caught this because it actually made the headline news. Someone did an fMRI of a couple having coitus and saw that the penis bent. No one knew that before. If you go to any standard medical diagram or textbook or something like that, there's this like straight rod driving straight into a woman's body, and that's not at all what happens. And once again, that was only a few years ago. And this kind of blows my mind. Medical professionals were amazed by that. It's like, and yet we're obsessed about these things, right? And yet we know so little. So despite the fact that there are so many different books published and so many different studies, but they tend to be what I would call one-off studies. Someone does a study of a thing, it's interesting, of course it's titillating, so it gets in the news and it gets published, but there's no follow-on. And isn't that one of the hallmarks of science? Repeatability of observations. And we don't have it with human sexuality. It's almost like we're just teasing ourselves with this stuff, but never really wanting to know. And so, we're talking about female orgasms. I think it's only appropriate for the last word to be left to a woman, but me, a guy, will say it. It's a call to science and rationality. It's from this one here, Nan Wise. She had a full career as a sex therapist, and at age 56 decided she was going to go back and get a PhD in studying human sexuality. She's actually getting a PhD in neurobiology, studies of how the brain functions while women have orgasms. And I love this quote from her, and I think it's a fitting way maybe to end tonight's little presentation. Unfortunately, there's more known about certain areas of outer space than there is about certain areas inside a woman's vagina. Could probably say the same about a lot of male anatomy as well. We have a lot of bits and pieces that we can talk about, but there's no sustained body of knowledge that tells us about the one thing that we seem to all be most obsessed about, and that is most central to our being here as biological organisms in the first place. Thank you a lot. Really pleasure to be here.